welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. The city remains under siege. Reactionary and fascist Republicans are finding that their fascist phalanx front is splintering to some degree. They are running scared in some cases. They're afraid that their super rich predatory backers, including the Koch brothers, the Koch brothers, are cutting them off from their funding. But the government remains closed, and the progress towards national bankruptcy and total chaos, disarray, and panic, all of that continues to go on. And all of that is real enough, despite the very stupid propaganda of the libertarians themselves, a creation in large part of these same wealthy predators. Here we are. It's Friday, the 11th of October already, and we have the following situation. On Wednesday of this week, the Koch brothers put out a statement specifying that they don't support strategies causing default, causing national bankruptcy, causing an interruption of payments on the U.S. national debt. The Koch brothers attempting to control the Frankenstein monster, this Tea Party, which they themselves created with hundreds of millions of dollars so far. And indeed, the Koch brothers had been pushing up until quite recently for this stuff to happen. But on Wednesday of this week, the Koch brothers got cold feet. Maybe their accountant had come in and said, look, Koches, Koch boys, you guys are going to lose big, right? Look at all these stocks you have, and look how they're all going to crash, and look at all the T-bills you own, and look at all the other derivatives you have, which depend on T-bills ultimately for their value. So the Koch brothers put out a signal. It's time to pull back tactically, right? They remain committed to denying anybody the chance to get treated under Obamacare. They want to wipe out Obamacare, but still they find that they don't want to drag themselves down into that maelstrom of panic and chaos. And then, sure enough, one day later, having heard his master's voice, i.e. the voice of Koch, the House Republicans, Boehner, meeting with Obama at the White House, say that they are willing to make a deal, and the deal would be to avoid the default sometime in the next week or two, although they left the question of shutting down the government or reopening the government, they left undecided, undefined. The proposal, as of now, the Republicans have sent some kind of a document to the White House, and it's not exactly clear what's in it, right? The document has not been made public as of the time we're recording, right? Here it is. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, the 11th of October. It looks like the Republican proposal is to reopen the government and keep it open until December 15th, and to extend the debt ceiling to about the 20th of November. So here we are on the treadmill. In the springtime, if you go back and look at these broadcasts or look at my Twitter feed, I warned against a reactionary fascisto-Republican strategy, which would be to bring the U.S. government to the brink and keep it there. Keep it in a situation of permanent crisis, try to wear down, demoralize, disorient their opposition, and try to impose their killer cuts that way. Because remember, that's the issue. The Republicans are the party of killer cuts. They say so. They've all agreed to the Ryan budget, which has got the killer cuts. Some of them demand the Rand Paul budget. That has even more killer cuts. there's also the Republican House Study Group, which is full of killer cuts. I don't know whether they're worse or whether Rand is the worst, but this is what they're after. And it's not really a matter of the deficit. It is simply the idea, on the one hand, they don't want to be taxed to pay for those programs, and they want the American workforce destitute and forced to work for whatever these predatory plutocrats choose to offer. They want you as an abject slave, serf, and so forth. Anything that gives you a safety net to fall back on, or any other kind of means of tempering this crisis and the ananke, right? The need, the penury of this low wage economy. They're devoted to a low wage economy. Everything that interferes with a low wage economy has got to go, because that interferes with the low wage economy. It's got to be a low wage economy, and you're on your own. So that's what they're fighting for. Make no mistake. It's a Confederate low wage economy. And of course, national suicide, because with that, you can't compete with China. You can't compete with India. You can't compete with Thailand or Vietnam with that. The U.S. has to be a high wage, high value added, high capital intensity, high energy intensity economy. You're either that or you are nothing. And with the Republicans, it's national suicide in the name of the low-wage economy. So their gambit: approximately 6 weeks of debt ceiling, and then about 2 months of government operations. It looks like the sequester, the killer cuts that were imposed under the Satan sandwich. We'll go through that chronology maybe at the end of the program. But you know that the Satan sandwich of August 2011 led to the deadly sequester cuts of earlier this year, a 10% cut in everything across the board. That is already gutting American society, especially in the key areas of research, development, science, education, and the things that will determine the future. So it looks like the sequester cuts would stay in place. And this is supposed to be a prelude to a grand bargain. The grand bargain, of course, is the monster fest of the austerity ghouls. Just one example. Picking up the Washington Post today, on page A5, we find an ad from Starbucks. They have a picture of their stupid, overpriced coffee, right? Their feeble imitation of an Italian espresso. And they say, sign the Come Together petition, says Starbucks. Sign the Come Together petition to our leaders in Washington, D.C. Now's the time to come together to, one, reopen our government to serve the people. I guess, serve the people. Well, we won't go through the origins of such a phrase, but they're mixed. Two, pay our debts in time to avoid another financial crisis. That's, I guess, something that we can allow to pass. But then, three, pass a bipartisan long-term budget deal by the end of the year. Wait a minute. No grand bargain. No long-term budget deal by the end of the year. Destroy the Republican Party first. Destroy the Republican Party first. That's the ticket. What the Republicans are looking for, they want this process to lead to a negotiation which will focus on Ryan and Camp. You remember Ryan, the failed vice presidential candidate, right? The John Birch Society fanatic from Wisconsin. And then Camp, who is the high priest of tax cuts for the rich and for predatory corporations. They're supposed to make a deal with them. No, don't make a deal with them. Get them out of there. Knock them out of the box. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., reporting on this crisis, right? This attack on the prevailing form of government of the United States by these reactionary Republicans. The neo-Confederate insurrection that rolls on. Well, Look at the situation now. The Republican Party is in unprecedented disarray. They have never been so divided. According to the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, they have never been so hated. There has never been such a consensus of rejection and revulsion against this medieval Dickensian force of social retrogression, cultural barbarism, hatred of science, rejection of progress, and all the rest. So why make a deal with them? Once you've defeated them, make them pay for their excesses at the polls. Cut them down to size, and perhaps by 2015, let's say, right after the Republicans have lost control of the House, then there'll be no need to make a deal with them. Why, if they're moribund, right, if they're on their deathbed politically, why extend the helping hand of a deal that would allow these Republicans to codify and perpetuate their barbaric and destructive choices in terms of society and finance and all the rest? It's insane. So this is now the point where the treachery of Obama, the treachery of the Democratic Party comes into play. We do not want a bargain. We do not want, above all, things like the chained CPI, the chained consumer price index, which turns out to be a infernal concoction of Peter Peterson of Lehman Brothers, right? That's the guy who stands behind these grand bargains. So let's look at it now. The background of this situation, according to the New York Times, the shutdown was planned for quite a number of months. Key parts of the planning were the reactionary Koch brothers. They brought forward $200 million of walking around money for these various parasitical groups, right? The ones that call themselves Americans for Prosperity or the various Tea Party variations. They wanted to have a confrontation in March. They couldn't quite manage it. Then Heritage Action increased its participation with former Senator DeMint down there from the cradle of secessionism. This article, I would say, should be enough to haul the Koch brothers before a Senate committee and force them to testify about their subversive activities. Remember the House Un-American Activities Committee? It was run by anti-communist McCarthyites and so forth. But now we have the Koch brothers, who actually are subversive, right? They actually are tampering with the system of government. Haul them before Congress, make them testify. The fact that this has not happened already with the Democrats, supposedly the enemy of these characters, controlling the Senate indicates that the Koch money speaks louder, perhaps, than the constitutional implications of what the Koch brothers are doing. In other words, these wealthy predators, reactionary individuals, they've got to be knocked back on their heels. They've got to be put on the defensive, right? They are obviously as arrogant and as impudent as ever through ALEC and through their other operations. I told you this was the story last week. It goes, it's not from Tinker to Evers to Chance. It's from Koch to DeMint to Cruz and then on to these clueless myrmidons in the House, right? The Amash and Yoho and others, right? People of that ilk, people of the Bachman stripe. All right. So the Koch brothers, however, on Wednesday say that they've had enough. There's also, around this time, you've got an op-ed from Ryan where Paul Ryan, the Republican, the reactionary running mate of Romney, Romney comes forward and says, well, he doesn't even mention it. He just says, let's by implication, let's drop this Obamacare stuff and get back to our basic killer austerity, killer cuts demand. So as of Thursday, we've had euphoria in the stock market, right? 300 points plus Another interesting element of the background of this, according to Harry Reid, Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House, Boehner is a liar. Boehner had made an arrangement, a deal, an agreement with Harry Reid that if the Senate agreed to extend the killer cuts in the sequester, then it would be possible to avoid the government shutdown and pass the so-called clean continuing resolution. In other words, simply extend the existing levels of funding of the federal government. But then when Boehner took that deal back to his masters, right, these barbarians in the Tea Party caucus, right, these bumpkins and hicks and yahoos and barbarians, right, people, again, I think in some cases sincerely bewildered by the modern world, and at any rate at war with what they would call modernity, they wouldn't do it. What this proves is that negotiations with Boehner are not just wrong in principle, they are a fool's errand in practice. A deal with Boehner gets you nothing. You can't make concessions to Boehner. His word is worthless. His commitments are worthless. He's a pathetic puppet. I think the evidence is actually mounting that Boehner is a high-grade alcoholic. You can see the little hints from people who seem to know, right? The stuff about the booze fumes wafting up to the press gallery. There's one where there's a trench, and Boehner is sitting there with a bottle of something or other, and he says, if I stick my neck out, I might lose my speakership. And the Uncle Sam figure next to him says, how did I ever get into a trench with this character, right? The coward, the faker, Boehner. Probable alcoholism in the case of Boehner, but the multiple personality disorder, that would help him because that's what he needs to do the job. Now, according to some accounts, the demands sent by the reactionary Republicans to the White House include already spending cuts. In other words, on Thursday, Boehner says to the press, I think we can have a clean bill, or doesn't mention any unclean elements, put it that way. He says, I think we can have an agreement to fund the government for 6 weeks. But now on Friday, 24 hours later, already it looks like intermediate spending cuts. In other words, pieces of killer austerity are sneaking back into the proposal. So don't waste your time talking with this degenerate. It's worthless. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, no grand bargain, no concessions to reactionary Republicans. Their party is ripe for destruction. Split them. During World War II, the strategy, summed up in a couple of words, was Germany first. In other words, you had the complex of Germany, Italy, and Europe, and then you had Japan in the Pacific. And correctly, the priority was given to the European front because Germany was a much more powerful and ideologically powerful force. Right? They had the sympathy of the predatory ruling class in many countries, including France, Britain, the United States, and so forth. So Germany had to be dealt with first. In this case, you could argue, well, the Democrats are also very bad. Bad indeed. But you've got to have priorities, and you've got to have the notion of a strategy, right? And we're not dealing, once again, in abstract academic evaluation of who's lower in the inferno and who's a little bit higher up. This is now a practical question. How do you fight your way out of this terrible situation? And I have advocated now for months, years, that it be destroy the Republican Party first, make them dwindle into a racist, reactionary, regional force, primarily in the South, some rural, Midwest, Intermountain West, and so forth. But that's going to be basically it. The way that could happen, we had former Congressman Davis of Northern Virginia on television this week somehow betraying the great fear of the thing that stands behind the erratic behavior of somebody like Boehner, is the fear that the Tea Party may create itself as a separate party. Bring it on for a number of reasons, because it will weaken the Republicans. if something emerges to the right of the Republicans, that's the moment when a New Deal party, the tax Wall Street party in particular, could emerge to the New Deal left of the existing Democratic Party. And that's the strategy that we're pursuing here. So it's Republicans first. If the Republican Party can be weakened in the way that I've described, at that point the Democratic Party would begin to split into a Wall Street branch and a more New Deal-oriented or populist branch. Now, right now in Washington, these reactionaries are gathering once again for their Values Voters Summit. I'm hoping some of these will be the last ones, right? Think of the last CPAC, the last Value Voters Summit, or maybe these things will be held in Montgomery, Alabama, or someplace like this in the future. But, of course, there you have Lee, you have Little Rand, you have Cruz, you have Bachmann. Just a couple of problems for these characters. It has now been widely pointed out the federal government is the largest single employer in the state of Utah. And the favorability of Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, you know him, right? We've talked about him. He's the descendant of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. He's the descendant of the Lee who killed all those Arkansas travelers in the Mountain Meadows Massacre back in the late 1850s. So Mike Lee's approval has fallen 25 points. It went from 71 to 57%. His unfavorability went up from 22 to 33%. That's Mike Lee. I wish he were up for election next year. He would be officially in trouble, even in Utah. Senator Ted Cruz, the other reactionary big mouth, he is viewed unfavorably by 30% across the country, and 22% view him favorably. So that's Cruz. But, of course, Cruz remains the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. Too bad for Little Rand. He's got somebody who seems to be more reactionary than he is, or more of a flamboyant reactionary. Little Rand pioneered the filibuster fraud technique, and then Cruz took it away from him. But the principal thing, Paul Ryan and Dave Camp must not influence the future course of the United States. They are poison. Their obsessions with debt, austerity, destruction of the social safety net, gutting of all the investments that are necessary in these soft and hard infrastructure areas, they represent national suicide. They represent sabotage and the unarrestable decline of the United States. So we don't want to deal with them. And this, of course, we also have to issue our warnings to Obama now. Obama, this is where you are tempted to go for the grand bargain. This is where you're tempted to bring out the chained consumer price index. It was clear to Obama before this started that a lot of even Democrats were fed up with his weakness, with his cowardice, and with his repeated capitulations. And a lot of people were horrified by the way Obama refused to fight, right? Oh, he didn't want to get out of his comfort zone. To hell with your comfort zone. Think of the comfort zone of those little people who are being crushed by your unprincipled compromises. So no to the chained CPI. The third rail lives. The third rail remains active. You touch Social Security, that's the end of you. That, of course, after all of this posturing, which I hope is going to be kept up, no negotiations. If you go from no negotiations to I'll give you the chain CPI, that's curtains. That will lose your base, and the same Republicans who are now on the ropes will be back energized to impeach you and perhaps even to remove you from office because you will be horrified. Think about what happened with Larry Summers, the rebellion of the Democratic senators who refused to accept Larry Summers. That's a small hint of what it would be like if Obama decides to sacrifice Social Security to make a deal with these gangsters who are going down anyway. Again, give it 18 months. or even less. Give it what, 13, 14 months. Those guys will be on their way out. So don't make a deal. Don't rush to make a deal now. Wait until they've paid the price at the polls for their current excesses. So also remember this stuff about the grand bargain, right? This is Peter Peterson, right? The main reactionary. According to him, remember, entitlements caused the crisis of 2008. How could that happen? 2008, of course, is caused by derivatives speculation, right? The abolition of Glass-Steagall, and above all, the legalization and deregulation of derivatives in 2000 by Phil Gramm of Texas, with the help of Clinton, of course, and Rubin. All of that stuff, that's the cause. But Rubin says, no, it's because we have a deficit and we've got to destroy the social safety net. Peterson has put $500 million, $500 million, into his notions of the grand bargain. Peterson not only was the head of Lehman Brothers, which is where the crisis started some years after he left, but he had been the head of the New York Federal Reserve. Peterson appointed Geithner, who then was the head of the Federal Reserve later on, his successor. So that's where the derivatives cancer got its start. Now, the Republicans are an unpopular minority. They're attempting to use these gangster methods to impose their will. And in the process, we're seeing, once again, the libertarians are nothing but shills for the Republicans. That's all they are. They're reactionaries with a little bit of narcotics sprinkled on top, perhaps. Interesting, we cited last week this former Republican, Michael Lofgren, and he's the guy with the neo-Confederate insurrection that sums this up, I think, quite well. He also has this phrase, rube bait. I've described this in the past, right? You look at these issues like guns, God, gays, abortion. What do you think the Koch brothers care about guns, God, gays, abortion? They don't care anything. That's rube bait. That's to get low information, naive rural voters to vote for them. What the Koch brothers care about is taxes, regulations, and making sure they don't get indicted. And in order to do that, you got to put out plenty of rube bait. Libertarians are largely rube bait these days. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. The city under siege, not just from government shutdowns and possible bankruptcies, but we've also got a bunch of loony truckers driving around the Beltway. They're going around in circles, right? We had bikers, we have truckers, we were going to have riflemen. My heavens, what a time it is here in Washington. But now, time to go to New York City, right? We want to get the update on the Tax Wall Street Party, right? The thing that leads out of this terrible situation, the Randy Credico campaign. And let's get Daniela Walls to come in. Daniela, we have about 20 minutes. We have two of these segments, so please give it to us straight.
Okay, so we're going to do two. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh and interrupt the truckers, riflemen, and bikers. So New Yorkers, Webster, are under the spell now of another well-marketed Wall Street machine candidate we're seeing with the de Blasio made to look like a man of the people. I'm afraid with de Blasio will be, like you say, Webster, they are setting themselves up for tragic disappointment. De Blasio came out this week in a private speech to 800 of New York's richest people where he called himself a fiscal conservative and made it clear that there's no reason for the elite to feel threatened by his policies. And much of what he said on the campaign trail was nothing more than rhetoric. You found me that article yesterday, Webster, titled Wall Street Coalesces Around Progressive Activist Fiscal Conservative Mayoral Candidate. The article said since winning the Democratic primary by such a steep margin, de Blasio has now aggressively turned to winning over the city's elite. I told you in another episode how de Blasio was regional director for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, under the Clinton administration. Well, he reassured his rich audience the other night that he intends to continue the right-wing policies that netted the city's aristocracy unimaginable wealth during the Clinton years. The article said his populist rhetoric and token gestures at alleviating social inequality were merely intended to divert growing anger amongst the city's working-class population and head off a social explosion from below. If this country was almost on the brink of revolution after the Bush years, if they didn't pacify it with Obama, and the same thing is happening in New York City, where there's the steepest wealth divide in the world. They knew if they didn't feed the people some progressive rhetoric, now things were set to get ugly, but it's all talk. During de Blasio's speech to the wealthy the other night, he took back earlier denunciations of Bloomberg and heaped repeated praise on Bloomberg for creating jobs and affordable housing and diversifying the economy. That's absolutely ridiculous, Webster, and criminal.
We have to get a reaction from Katrina vanden Heuvel and the people at The Nation now that their golden boy has shown his true reactionary banker Wall Street clone colors.
Yeah, we need Vander Heuvel to elucidate us. But this is absolutely ridiculous, Webster, because the city's wealth divide and homelessness is worse than it's ever been before in the city's history. So, and this is what de Blasio is lauding. He's shockingly lauded this part of Bloomberg's record. The average cost of a one-bedroom apartment under de Blasio's affordable housing plan has now emerged to be over $2,000 a month. Like I said when we discussed that it wasn't going to be affordable for people making the minimum wage. Well, that's what they're coming out with now. It's over $2,000 a month. So many of the homeless in shelters in New York City currently actually hold full-time jobs at the current minimum wage or even higher than the minimum wage, if you can believe that. So there's full-time employed people living in New York City's homeless shelters currently, 50,000 of them. The median wage has fallen steeply since 2007, while the median apartment prices kept rising, and that's been the recipe for leaving more homeless in the city than ever before, Webster. And also funny is that de Blasio made the choice to skip the televised debate with Loda and Carrion on the night he met with the city's elite, because de Blasio arrogantly figures that he has the people in his pocket now because he's 50% ahead in the polls. And instead, the priority was to use that evening to pander to these hedge fund CEOs and media moguls. He met privately with Lloyd Blankfein, our favorite, from Goldman Sachs, and reassured him. He met with the CEO of Viacom and Rupert Murdoch and Mort Zuckerman. He got a standing ovation from these top parasites. So moving forward, the best that I can do is I'm imploring listeners to watch some of the YouTube campaign ads we've made. You can watch these ads on the homepage of Randy's website at creditcode2013.org. If we can raise money here in the closing weeks, we'd love to put one of these ads on the air.
Daniela, why don't you give us a quick summary of some of these, so people get the idea that, do a little, the Barker routine, get them to go in. So each of the YouTube commercials we made pertain to a separate issue in the campaign, whether it's stop and frisk, financial dictatorship, the police state, or prison industrial complex, or poverty. So in one ad's called Vote Credico and Make New York City an Even Playing Field. Randy impersonates Lou Gehrig, the Yankees baseball player. He talks about how they are subsidizing building sports stadiums instead of homes for the poor in spite of this rising homeless epidemic, like I just told you about. He said that if people vote Credico, they can, quote, bring this rigged game of politics by special interests and Wall Street to an end and make the city an even playing field instead of finding more ways to stick it to the little guy. The ad says, and that could happen if we all go out and vote Randy Credico on November 5th. Randy will bring this rigged game to an end and will be the luckiest people on the face of the earth, Webster. So, remember, Randy's doing these all impersonating all the voices, so I'm just giving a description. So go and watch them because they're really clever and fun. Tell us a couple of others. Come on, let's hear some more.
Okay, in another ad, Randy plays Jimmy Stewart going up against Mr. Potter and It's a Wonderful Life. The ad's called It's a Wonderful Campaign. The idea is that Mr. Potter types are in New York City have this election all sewn up for de Blasio.
Right.
From the start, he's been financed by New York City's financial elite, Wall Street, big media, big real estate, so there's never been a chance for the other. He impersonates Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca. And this one's all about the tragic disappointment the voters will face soon after de Blasio is elected and doesn't come through on his promises, much like Obama didn't. Humphrey Bogart says to Ilsa that if she, quote, votes for de Blasio, one of these days she'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of her life. Because de Blasio won't touch the real elite, on Wall Street that control everything in the city and our politicians.
So, Daniela, these are now the television spots ready to go, and all we need is the money to get them on the air on actual broadcast TV, right?
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. If we can raise the money here in the closing week, we'd love to put one of these ads on the air. We'd love to be in a position to be able to buy a couple of ads between now and November 5th for local cable TV. Randy made the ads humorous and hard-hitting at the same time, and those are the kind of things that if a New Yorker sees in the midst of all these, typical machine political ads, people will be like, have you seen the Credico ad? But right now, it's hard to spread them on YouTube. But if we can raise a little, we can get them on TV, even if it's late night.
One other point, you've got one in Spanish?
Oh, yeah. Well, we have the Sandinista Reagan ad in Spanish. I'll tell you about that 1 second. Should I tell you? I mean, this was going to say that we need donations in order to do this.
Go right ahead.
If people can donate, like I've said before in other episodes, there's a donate button on the homepage of Randy's website at credico2013.org. And if people could take a few moments to post a comment and plug Randy's candidacy, make sure to include his website address, credico2013.org, or text Wall Street Party's website address in your comment, text wallstreetparty.org. On any article pertaining to the New York City mayoral race or New York City radio station websites or New York City network news websites, because hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers read these comments, Webster. The purpose of commenting on these big platforms, try to find the biggest you can, is to remind people that Randy is also running. And,
okay,
that is
Daniela, we've got the hard break coming up. We're gonna hold you over now until the next segment after the news. Come back for another 10 minutes.
Sure.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and we're looking at the New York City mayoral election. This is the big one. This is the important one nationwide, because this is where the new party is emerging, the Tax Wall Street Party. Daniela, let me just point out that article that you were mentioning. This is from a somewhat dubious source. You notice there are two things that are wrong with the article. They don't tell you that de Blasio is a clone of Soros and was from the beginning and from before the beginning. In other words, guys like that are groomed months or years in advance. It's not like he's changing his he's tacking towards the center because of normal political stuff. It's that he was a Soros clone all the time. The other big problem with the article is they don't talk about Credico, because he doesn't measure up on their Trotskyist scale of positions or whatever it is they have. So there we go.
I picked the valuable information out of that article and disregarded the rest. But yeah, we were talking about the purpose before of commenting on big platforms, being to remind people that Randy is also running and has running, which, like you said, they're blacking him out everywhere and blacking out his platform. Our objective here in the closing weeks is to get Randy's name in front of as many New York voters as possible. I think the silver bullet would be to get one of these ads I was talking about on New York City cable. If people use their own creativity, they can think of many ways to do this, much better than ways I think of. The ad you were referring to, that with the help of donations, we aired this ad in Spanish on late-night Spanish radio spots, was when Randy impersonates Reagan, coming back, weighing in on this recent Sandinista limited hangout that happened a few weeks ago. The ad's called Reagan Scorns Sandinista Takeover of New York City, and Reagan goes into lengthy detail about Randy's record in Nicaragua and ends by saying Randy wants to tax Wall Street and give it to the poor. I'm telling you, Reagan says, Credico is well armed with lots of dangerous ideas. If you see him walking in your neighborhood, notify the authorities that there's a man on the loose who wants to help the poor. And we got a lot of calls from people who heard that and said it was really shocking and funny.
Great.
Do you want to hear about a few more ads, or
please do?
Okay, I have a little bit about the other candidates. Anything you want to ask me? But okay, so Randy plays Richard Nixon, who says that he and Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn, quote, popped up from hell today to give advice to the Republican candidate Joe Lhota. They urge Lhota to stop wasting his time smearing de Blasio because nothing's going to stick to him since he's backed by the financial elite, and Nixon tells Lhota that he should go after the real progressive Randy Credico. And then my favorite, and I think this will be your favorite, is when he impersonates Reverend Al Sharpton, where he has Sharpton start out by saying, "Hi, I am the Reverend Al Sharpton. I'm not a progressive, but I often play one on TV, and that is why I'm supporting Bill de Blasio for mayor, because Bill de Blasio is not a progressive either, but he plays one on TV, like me. He'll never criticize President Obama, no matter how many people die in foreign wars or rot in federal prison. So I suggest you vote for the guy who plays a progressive on TV, Bill de Blasio, and don't bother voting for the real progressive, Randy Credico." So that's the Sharpton one. And then finally, we've got Bill Clinton urging everyone to vote for Bill de Blasio because de Blasio worked for Bill Clinton and went along seamlessly with all of his policies, including ending welfare and overturning Glass-Steagall. So Clinton says, "If you want more of the same, then do not vote for Randy Credico on November 5th. Vote for a Clinton Democrat, Bill de Blasio." So that's our ads, but obviously I did a bad job representing them. So please go to the website. They're right in the center of the homepage, and you can watch them all and share them. And
that sounds great, Daniela. That sounds very effective. Now, here's what people have to think about, right? Get that on TV in New York, right? Get that into Blankfein's face. Get that into Jamie Dimon's face. Get it into Bloomberg's face and Soros's face. Let them come home and turn their TV on and have that blaring out at them. So send them a message. And lucky for people out there, by giving money to this campaign, you can do that. So the campaign has done all the work. The last step is missing. People should send in contributions and do it now and generously. And then don't complain in the future if you didn't do it, if everything goes to hell.
Yes, thank you, Webster. Getting on cable, I think, is going to be the silver bullet. And people can also post these ads on Jamie Dimon's Facebook page. They can post them. They can tweet at him. You can find big, like you're having this big truckers.
There's nothing to it, Daniela. It's right. Nothing. It's four cats in a corner.
Okay, but I used that Facebook page because it had hundreds of thousands of like clicks, and I used it as an opportunity to post stuff about Randy's campaign. And I said, "What are you guys going there protest? What is your list of demands? What's the point of all this? Just to block traffic? Then you're no better than Occupy, just blocking the park." And I wrote a comment, and I said, and I put down our platform, and I said, "Do you have a 1% Wall Street sales tax? Are you planning on nationalizing or seizing the Federal Reserve? Instituting protective trade tariffs? All of our things, parity agriculture, Medicare for all. What's your point, guys? Are you there to strengthen Social Security, or is it just more whining or a stunt?" And it seems like so many of these things are just stunts. What do they get? I think they said they were going there to arrest Congress people who will all be hiding. It's just so.
It's a counter gang. We got to get this straight. Those guys are a counter gang, right? Who knows how many provocateurs have seeded those ranks? If you listen to this program, I will. I'm going to get to them in a segment. This is the way the CIA overthrew Allende in Chile, starting with truckers. The good news is, though, that they got about 30 or 40 trucks on the Beltway in the morning rush today, and that was their one chance, right? If they weren't out in the morning rush today, they're going to be nowhere. I think it is somehow linked to that biker incident in New York City and some other things. But let's not waste time on that. Let's get back to the Credico campaign. Now, the other big thing is to what extent the tax Wall Street party is spreading, and you have some news on this, right?
Well, the tax Wall Street party is really taking off, and I'm trying to hold that back a little bit and put the emphasis on Randy until the 5th. But I'm getting inquiries and attention from candidates all over the country wanting to run, really top-notch people. and real leaders. And I mean, I have lawyers and physicists and, just really amazing people, artists, all coming forward. I'm putting together like a think tank, a group. We're putting together a small private social network site where people can brainstorm ideas. And if you'd like to be on that list to help us found this party, then email me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. But for now, the more votes we get on November 5th, the bigger message it sends and the more momentum we're going to have moving forward. This New York City mayoral race is the Tax Wall Street Party's first campaign, like you said, and we would like to come out with as strong a showing as possible to boost all our future candidates running for Congress in 2014. And we've got some really great people. I don't want to name names yet until they 100% confirm and say I'm allowed to talk about them on air. But I'm really excited about a few.
Because of Federal Election Commission regulations, you can't announce for them. They have to announce in their own good time according to those regulations. So that's perfectly understandable.
A few of them have run as independents in their state and gotten large margins. Like one guy ran and got 38% of the vote in his area. And these are real serious people. So I'm very happy. So we want after November 5th people to scratch their heads on election night when they see how many votes Randy gets on the Tax Wall Street Party platform and say, wow, this is what's this platform all about? And realize that a lot of the votes are going to be program-based, and we want to see a demonstration that a fighting economic program is what people want, and not just rhetoric and politics anymore.
Okay, Daniela, thank you so much. Now we want you back next week, and we'll go to a 20-minute report each week and through the actual election. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Webster. Thank you for everything.
See you soon. Bye-bye. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Battered but unbowed here after the shutdown and on the brink of bankruptcy and hard-pressed by traffic jams. Actually, there are no traffic jams. That is a big nothing. Their one chance was this morning in the rush hour, and it amounted to a hill of beans. Zip. Now, getting to the big picture. We all know Sister Agnes Mariam de la Croix, Sister Agnes Mariam of the Cross. She is a Melkite religious. She's a Melkite Christian nun. Melkites being a Greek Catholic liturgy, and they are united with the Roman Pope, Francis. So these are the Melkites. And I had the honor of staying for a while at their convent there of Qara, Q-A-R-A, between Damascus and Homs. Agnes Mariam of the Cross, extremely active internationally, UN Human Rights Commission, and other events. And if you look at my website, tarpley.net, you'll see that some weeks back she put out a report which was a critique and refutation of these fake, doctored, cooked films, the various videos that were used by NATO intelligence in order to create the war hysteria that almost plunged the world into some kind of cataclysmic event back at the beginning of September and during September. And this is now quieted down thanks to Putin and Lavrov. But the question remains, who launched chemical weapons? Who is responsible for the events of August 21st in Ghouta, in the suburbs, the western suburbs of Damascus? It's not so far from where I stayed there during the time that I was there almost 2 years ago. So Sister Agnes Mariam de la Croix put out this report essentially pointing to the fact that uncovered, ignored by the Western media, there had been a massacre and a mass kidnapping in the Syrian port city of Latakia on the coast of the Mediterranean, mainly Alawites over there, right? Ancient port, it's well known. So she says that the children, the victims that you see in these grisly videos, were cynically used as props by propaganda technicians, by these al-Qaeda killers, in order to create this frame-up, right, this carefully pre-planned provocation, as the Russian Foreign Ministry said. So you can see that on my website. The heart of the article, the heart of the argument is this Latakia question. Now, Sister Agnes Mariam has forced Human Rights Watch, who were supporting the bombing. Human Rights Watch was in favor of bombing Syria to hell. They were coming in as shameless auxiliaries of the U.S. State Department, right? Stooges and valets and toadies for Skull and Bones Kerry. Human Rights Watch has now been forced to put out a report in which they acknowledge, they admit that the events in Latakia in the first week of August, with about 200 murdered and 200 kidnapped, were done by our wonderful heroes of democracy, the Free Syrian Army and the wonderful pro-democracy, anti-Assad fighters. So this is a tribute to the power of what Sister Agnes Mariam, with the little help from her friends, has been able to do. Now, the good news here is you want to do something about this here in North America. Well, Sister Agnes Mariam is coming between late October, I think she'll be here during the last week of October, until the first week of December. And if you want to look into this, there is a solicitation online if you want her to come to your institution, your university, your city, your part of the country, Canada too, certainly, Mexico, I would think also. Anywhere in North America seems to be the framework. Then you can do it. Now, since she is not supported by the Rockefeller, Ford, and other foundations, it will require contributions. But if you want to look into this, you go to www.syriasolidaриtymovement.org, www.syriasolidaриtymovement.org, Mother Agnes Mariam, and you get the details of when she'll be here and how you can, basically the political message she'll be bringing, and then this question of scheduling, which involves a commitment to help pay some of these expenses. So if you wanted to add an extra leg to the trip, then what can you contribute? And remember, you should come forward in any case, because if you're in, Portland, Oregon or something, it may be that other forces that you don't know about in your community have already invited her, and therefore you can simply join with them. So that, I think, is going to make a big difference. It's also important to point out, we'll have more about this in the future, but I urge you to look into that, the Syrian Solidarity Movement website. Syrian Solidarity Movement website is the place to go. SyrianSolidarityMovement.org. Find out all about the trip of Sister Mother Agnes Mariam de la Croix. And now the other thing, of course, is that the lies about Syria have been very dense, and we've got an interesting article today in that same Washington Post that the talking heads that you saw advocating the attack, many of them totally corrupt, totally paid for. How about Stephen Hadley, reactionary Republican, a Bushman, former NSA director for Bush, a forceful advocate for the strikes on Bloomberg television, but he's linked to Raytheon that would be selling the Tomahawk cruise missiles that would have been the leading edge of the attack. Hadley has gotten $128,500 in cash compensation from Raytheon in a year. He's also part of Rice Hadley Gates, an international strategic consulting firm. And, of course, some of these people got op-eds in the Washington Post, so the Washington Post very embarrassed, saying, Hadley contributed an op-ed, but, of course, his opinions were not colored by his association with Raytheon and by the $130,000 in cash. Are we nuts? Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, Sister Agnes Mariam going up against Human Rights Watch. The head of that, warmonger, repeatedly on television, demanding that the bombings start already. Interesting story here. Turns out that General Anthony Zinni of the Marines is not exactly clean. He's on the board of directors of BAE Systems. He was chairman of the board of BAE Systems from 2009 to 12. Gets to be on television, although he was at least something of a dove. And General Jack Keane, retired General Jack Keane, former Army Vice Chief of Staff, big warmonger on Fox News. He was going up against others who were not warmongers there. He's part of the Institute for the Study of War. Notice, not peace, but war. But, of course, he's been on the board of General Dynamics for quite a while, another contractor for the destroyers in this case, which would have been the ships there in the front line. Maybe they would have gotten sunk by a Yachts, but then that's fine. General Dynamics will build you new ones at Bath Iron Works. So all of this corruption. So if you're sick and tired of that corruption and double dealing, get Agnes Mariam of the Cross to come to your community, because she really believes in what she's doing, and this is the cause of humanitarianism. It's God's work, if you want to look at it that way. However you want to describe it, it's peace. Now, the U.S. is in an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood. This is absolutely fundamental. You look at Syria, what is it? The U.S. wants to bomb Assad, or Kerry wanted to bomb Assad for the greater glory of the Muslim Brotherhood. Turn the country over to the Islamic Emirate of Sham and Iraq, as well as these other puppets in the Free Syrian Army. They wouldn't last very long. It would become chaos. Where this leads, we see in the case of Libya, right? We don't need to go into the details except to say the chaos, the anarchy, the breakdown, the failed state in Libya was all predictable, predicted by me from there in real time, before the fact. So we've got Ali Zaidan, the prime minister of Libya, kidnapped and then released by one of these 150 armed goons who took him out of the Corinthian hotel, right? One of the more luxurious ones there. Not the one I stayed at, but one of the more luxurious ones. So that's the future. In other words, that's a failed state. And, of course, from the point of view of NATO, they can even just get by with the oil that's being extracted from offshore drilling platforms, and the rest of the country can go to hell. One of the things you're seeing here, if you've ever read the history of Europe in the period, say, 300, 400, 500 A.D., the barbarian invasions, the fall of the Roman Empire, 476 A.D., the coming of Attila the Hun in particular, you wonder, how could those barbarians from the steppes of Central Asia defeat the Roman army, the Roman phalanx? Now, there are many complicating factors, but you're seeing how this happened when you realize that ruling class factions inside the advanced or so-called civilized world make corrupt bargains or attempt to manipulate the barbarian forces into knocking off their rivals or doing other tasks that they think are important. And in the case of Attila the Hun, the presumption has to be that forces in the Byzantine Empire, East Rome, right, over there in Constantinople, they essentially told Attila the Hun, don't attack us. Oh, no, we're not worth attacking. Go attack Rome and leave us alone. And here's some help in doing so, right? Here's some money or some supplies, or here's some intelligence above all, right? There's even, I think it's the Beards, Charles and Mary Beard, who point out that the Venetians were, they were created in this way, right? This is where they emerge. But Attila the Hun comes forward. How could he do these things? He was defeated once at Chalon by the Roman general Ezio, but then he makes a comeback. You're seeing how it works. If you had a common front against these barbarians, it wouldn't go down this way. But the fact that you don't. All right. So look at Egypt. It's clear. Kerry of the State Department, the skull and bones Secretary of State, has cut off aid to the Egyptian army. Why? Because they're not kowtowing to the Muslim Brotherhood. They're not democratic, he would say, right? You cannot have deals with people like Morsi and his backers, right? It's just not possible. But Kerry continues to interfere. I would say this is another occasion where Kerry needs to be fired. He needs to be kicked out. And then we've got also what's going on in Syria and then what's going on in Libya. Let's look also at Afghanistan. Karzai is very angry with the U.S., and well, he might be. He is accusing the United States of essentially meddling in his relations negotiations with the Taliban. And remember, there are two kinds of Taliban. There's the indigenous Afghan Taliban, and then there's the Taliban on the other side in Pakistan, and that second group is completely a creation of the United States. So if Karzai is trying to recruit a Taliban leader to be a double agent and work for him, and the United States comes in and arrests that guy so that they can't make him into a double agent, you get the idea. It's clear that the United States, just as is happening in Egypt, just as is happening in Syria, just as we see the full fruits in Libya, in Afghanistan, the United States is trying to strengthen the Taliban to make sure that you'll have continuous chaos in Afghanistan, so no Russian, Chinese, Iranian, Indian pipelines can be built, and, of course, so that the chaos can be exported across the border into Pakistan. So I'm sympathetic to what Karzai is saying. Kerry is there. Apparently, Kerry has rushed to try to stop Karzai because Karzai is threatening that there will be no U.S. presence in the future if they keep this up. He's accusing the United States of collaborating with the terrorists, with the Taliban. Well, why not? They do it everywhere else in the world. Why wouldn't they do it there? The NATO departure from Afghanistan, of course, scheduled for December 2014. So again, you want to get out of this situation. You can do something to support the North American tour of Sister Agnes Mariam de la Croix. Now, the truckers. I guess we should say something about. Oh, let's do Yellen. This is more to the point. Now, Obama, in his folly, has decided to announce that Janet Yellen, is his candidate to be the head of the Federal Reserve. Now, of course, his original choice was Larry Summers. That was even worse. That was a very impolitic choice. And maybe the fact that Obama was willing to dump Summers is a sign of some growing realism, right? That you can't continue to diss your political allies and humiliate them and contradict what they want, and also fall all over yourself making concessions to the reactionary Republicans. But now we have Yellen. Well, we hope that Yellen won't be approved. She shouldn't be. The Corker line, Republican in the Senate, is that she's too much into this hot money, and that's true. She is into QE3. She's a Bernanke clone. She wants QE3. It won't work. We'll be back in a minute to tell you why. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Last segment. Remember to keep up with everything on Tarpley.net, Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. You can now follow the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed right on the Tarpley.net website. So now we have Yellen, a clone of Bernanke, meaning that she's going to go with the hot money. And, of course, the hot money doesn't work. It simply spurs speculation, derivatives. It's essentially a support operation for bankrupt derivatives, QE1, QE2, QE3. Those were all derivative support 1, derivative support 2, and 3, and they create bubbles in various third world markets or sometimes in real estate, but they do not bring recovery because they do not increase the production and employment in the capital goods area. High technology, high capital intensity, high energy intensity, high value added has no effect on any of that. It's purely for bankers and for speculators, right? The consumer-led recovery of the stimulus is better, but it doesn't last. It's been tried and it's been over. Otherwise, we have the immediate deflationary crash, liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate real estate. That's the Ron Paul, Rand Paul Republican solution. That would not work well either. Peter Schiff was in favor of that. Nope. And what's left is the Lautenbach-Voitinsky method, which I represent, which is get control of the Federal Reserve or part of it, open up a credit stimulus, start putting out $5 trillion, I would say, to begin with, make a tender offer to the governors, county executives, other regional authorities. Let's rebuild the entire infrastructure, and let's earmark $1 trillion to refinance all existing student loans down to 0% or extremely close to zero. It might be a 0.01% interest rate or something like that, but something trivial. Instead, we're going to get Yellen, a mediocrity, a hack. Her husband won the Nobel Prize in economics. That's the kiss of death. And their supposed contribution is based on their theory that it's better to have a high-cost babysitter. And from this, they conclude that stimulus can increase demand for labor. Well, you want to increase demand for labor, do what I say. Create a $5 trillion credit facility, buy up those 0% 100-year bonds from the various states, and you will have your steel, concrete, construction industries, and then the multiplier effect of all of that, and it will be high tech. It will be high capital intensity. You'll be reviving your capital goods industry. She comes from Fort Hamilton High School in Brooklyn, class of 1963. I'm sorry, it doesn't save her. She supported NAFTA. Yellen is in favor of that giant sucking sound that has sucked all the U.S. jobs into Mexico. It has been bad for Mexico, bad for Canada, bad for the United States. She supports free trade. And remember when Obama ran, he said that he would try to review or even renegotiate NAFTA. And then he sent Austin Goolsbee to the Canadian consulate to say, don't worry, he doesn't mean it. That's just rube bait. Well, she's also supported, let's see what else. We know that she's supported the repeal of Glass-Steagall. So she was a complete stooge for Sandy Weil of Citibank, who wanted to merge Travelers Insurance, Citibank, and a bunch of other semi-bankrupt interests. And she's essentially incompetent. She's also an austerity ghoul. She's in favor of the chained consumer price index. She wants to, in the good Peter Peterson or bad Peter Peterson tradition, she wants to gouge working people to maintain these bankrupt structures of derivatives. So no to Yellen. And instead, I recommend, please join the campaign on Twitter, Tarpley for Fedhead. Tarpley, the number 4, Fedhead. Tarpley for Fedhead on Twitter. Put some of that stuff out. No to Yellen. Yellen should withdraw in the way that Summers already did. And we mentioned before the truckers. Well, the truckers, it amounted to nothing, but it could have amounted. We don't know. A couple of them were arrested by state troopers, I think, in Virginia, less in Maryland. Back in October 1972, in Chile, the CIA pioneered the use of truckers for destabilization and coup. The CIA is known to have paid several $1 million to the owner-operator truckers and other truckers of Chile to begin a strike to shut down the nationwide transportation, to begin the overthrow of Allende. And after that, you had the pots and pans revolt. So we go from the truckers to the pots and pans to a military coup that brought in Pinochet. We ought to go back and ask those Chilean truckers, do you think that was a good deal? You thought Allende was the end of the world, but now after all those years of Pinochet, what do you think? Then in the mid-1970s, you can look back in the LaRouche publications of the day, and you will see something about FASH, the Fraternal Association of Steel Haulers, the Overdrive magazine, that's still around, and this guy Mike Parkhurst, who by now is getting on in years, and his group called the Roadmasters, and how they seem to be trying to do something along the lines of what had been done in Chile. Well, of course, when you get to these things, when you get to a bunch of people riding to Washington that they want to arrest members of Congress, they want to impeach the president because he's not living up to their idea, their primitive, distorted idea of the Constitution. That's not so good, right? First time as tragedy, subsequently as farce, right? Rome, October 1922, Mussolini's March on Rome. Could have been dispersed, but no, the king wanted it. He wanted Mussolini, so that was that. Paris, September 1934, the attack on the French National Assembly by all the reactionary and fascist and monarchist groups, and it almost succeeded, right? A thin line of cops were the last thing left. So you look at this and you say, well, aren't we getting a pattern now? And don't you think government agents have a role in this? One is this New York City biker event, when you have a bunch of bikers surrounding a car, and then it turns out that quite a few of the bikers are undercover cops. Doesn't that mean that the cops were running the bikers, right? The Hells Angels were being directed by the cops to act as provocateurs in the name of what? We had the Kukesh story here some months back, right? What was that, right? To come into Washington with a brigade armed with rifles, what would that have looked like? And now we have the truckers. Again, the main thing about this is that it didn't amount to anything, but it is disturbing. And you also have this thing with the bikers who came forward and said, oh, we're going to shut down the Million Muslim March. We're going to shut down what became then the Million American March Against Fear, which I attended. But the bikers were driving by, but they never really did anything to try to interfere with somebody else's free speech on the National Mall. So 5 minutes of ridicule is probably enough for a lot of this right now. The other thing is, look at somebody like Petraeus and wonder what his relation to all this is. General Petraeus has been contested again in Los Angeles. Good. Accused of war criminal General Petraeus status in a demonstration there, after a bunch of people in New York City were arrested and beaten up because they dared to protest this new Julius Caesar, the new Bonaparte and Bonapartist coming on. So now we're left with the question of the party systems, and we've talked about this. There was a Republican one from 1896 to 1932. There was the best one we've ever had from 1932 to 1968. And then from 1968 to 2008, we had the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy is now ending. And what we're seeing is the death rattle, the death throes of that. The Republican Party is a Potemkin village. It depends on money, courts, vote fraud, Fox News, a whole apparatus necessary to continue the illusion that there really is a Democratic Party, maybe a Republican Party. Maybe that will collapse over the weeks ahead. See you soon. Back next week with World Crisis Radio. And don't take any wooden Bitcoins.